Hello, guys. Welcome to our first interview of the season. We are super, super excited for this one. It's a really interesting conversation. I feel like we both learned a ton and walked away with a ton of new insights into the chemicals of love. So we hope you'll enjoy it. Today, we are joined by Dr. Sandra Langeslag, who obtained her PhD in biological and cognitive psychology at the Erasmus University Rotterdam in the Netherlands. She is the director of the Neurocognition of Emotion and Motivation Lab. She studies the interaction between cognition and emotion. While some of the studies are about emotions in general, most of her studies concern romantic love. Super fitting for this season. Specifically, Dr. Longeslag studies the neurocognition of romantic love using event related potentials, cognitive tasks, and self report measures. This research is extremely relevant and important because virtually everyone falls in love at least once, and falling in love has a major impact on our lives. Dr. Longeslag studies real life love, parasocial love, and love for artificial intelligence companions. So, super excited to dive into this conversation. Let's get on with it. So, Dr. Longeslag, thank you so much for joining us. For our listeners meeting you for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. First, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk about my work. I'm Sandra Langeslag. I'm an associate professor in psychological and brain sciences at the University of Missouri in St. Louis.
I think it would be helpful if you told us a little bit about how you got started on this journey and, how you chose your specialty. Was it something that you knew right away when you were studying or researching? Walk us through the trajectory of your career a little bit.
So, when I was in high school, I was always interested in all the science classes like physics, chemistry, biology, math. And then when I had to decide what to major in after high school, I was unsure until I saw a textbook that was called Introduction to Biological Psychology. And I was like, wait, is that a thing? Does that exist? And people were telling me, yeah, that's a whole field of psychology. And then I was like, that's what I want to do. And I did. And then right before I started my undergrad, so half a year before, I was heartbroken because my high school boyfriend broke up with me. And then half a year later, right before I started my undergrad, I fell in love with someone new. And so then I was head over heels. And so then when I was in my psychology classes, I was always trying to apply it to me and trying to figure out what's happening in my body and my brain because I had those two experiences, super heartbroken and then super infatuated. And then whenever I had to write a paper for a class, I always tried to make it about sort of the biology of love if it would fit the assignment. And that's when I discovered that there wasn't a whole lot of research on the brain and the body in love. And then I was like, well, maybe I should start studying that. And I did. And so I'm super excited to be here and to now actually study that myself.
That's so cool. That leads perfectly into my next question that I have. So, our theme for this season of Bright Lights Beyond is the chemicals of love. And when you hear that phrase, what kind of comes up for you?
Yeah, so I'm often asked, what chemical, what neurotransmitter, what hormone, or even what brain region is involved in love. And that's actually a very difficult question to answer because there is no what we call one to one mapping between brain function and brain anatomy, which means that every brain region, every neurotransmitter, and every hormone has multiple functions. And each function, including love, but also, for example, memory or whatever you're talking about at that time, is supported by many different brain regions and hormones and neurotransmitters. And so there's no like one love brain region, one love hormone, or one love neurotransmitter. Sorry to disappoint you.
No, it's not disappointing because we neither of us are STEM people, science people. It fascinates us, but that's not particularly what we're good at. So we always love to have experts on to really dig into the science behind these concepts that we like to study. So that was really, really helpful, I think, for us. And when I was doing my research, obviously on you, your own research, what you kind of write and talk about and teach about, I noticed that you said that romantic love is not necessarily an emotion, but almost like a motivation, like hunger, thirst, etc. Can you kind of talk us through what changes when we start thinking about love as a motivation versus an emotion?
Yeah. So it's a bit of a technical issue. Also, researchers don't agree. On the one hand, it doesn't really matter, but on the other hand, the point I was trying to make was that we cannot just assume that anything we know about emotions generalizes to love. Because yes, I do think love is not an emotion, but again, not everyone agrees. But we need to study love in and of itself and not just saying we know these things about emotions, so that must then also be true for love. So that's why that is important in my work to think about love as a motivation.
It does make sense. I can't remember where it was that I was reading about it, but it was talking about how, romantic love and partnership more specifically isn't just, a good feeling or a good to have. It's also a survival mechanism. Especially, like, you think of, like, cavemen and I mean, still today, obviously, but, like, partnership was a means of survival. It was a means not to an end because that makes it sound so sterile, but in some ways it can be, so I really appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, and kind of going off of that, so when you hear or if someone were to ask you, like, "Is love just dopamine?" Like, what's your best answer for it?
Yeah, so again, it gets complicated because there's so many different hormones, neurotransmitters, brain regions, and functions. But here's how I like to think about that. So we know that there are multiple forms of love. Researchers don't agree on how many and which ones, but in my work, I use a model proposed by Helen Fisher that in humans we have something called sexual desire or lust. We have infatuation or passionate love, which is that early stage love that is accompanied by butterflies in the stomach and nervousness. And then we have attachment or companionate love, which is a like emotional bond you form with someone you've probably been in a relationship with for a while. And we know that some or the animals must have some form of sexual desire because they mate. Some animals also have a form of attachment or companionate love because they form pairs. So there's pair bonding. But this infatuation or passionate love stage, I don't know if animals have that. And if they do, I don't know how we will be able to tell. But why that's important is because if you want to study the brain and hormones and neurotransmitters, sometimes to study that is very invasive, and invasive means that you have to measure blood or actually do surgery on the brain or sometimes even kill the animal to measure then neurotransmitter levels in the brain. And so we know quite a bit of the neurobiology of sexual desire and attachment from animal research, but this infatuation and passionate love stage we know way less because again I don't know if animals have it and how we will be able to tell, which means we need to study it in humans, and that means a lot of the invasive stuff we don't do in humans. So that was a long intro to get to the point about dopamine. So yes, it has been hypothesized that dopamine is involved in romantic love, but we don't have a lot of data, and by that I mean infatuation or passionate love, so that early stage. There are some fMRI studies, which are brain scanning studies, that have shown that regions that are high in dopamine are more active when people look at their beloved than when they look at other people, such as their friend or acquaintances or family members or strangers. And so that suggests dopamine is involved, but the fMRI cannot measure dopamine levels. Now, there's one study that's a PET study in which you inject radioactive substance that attaches to dopamine receptors. There's one study that I know of that has been done in people, and that shows that there's more dopamine release in the prefrontal cortex, which is behind your forehead, when people look at their beloved than when they look at a friend. And so that, to my knowledge, is the only study that actually has measured dopamine levels in people because that's so difficult to do. And it's important to realize that we have no studies comparing people that are in love versus that are not in love. So this is a study that compared people who were in love looking at their beloved versus looking at their friend, which I think is a great way to study this. In conclusion, I think dopamine is probably involved, but at this point we don't have a lot of data to really say whether that's really the case or not, just because it's very difficult to study in people.
I find it really fascinating that, the research on love is not all consistent. This podcast was started about, near death experiences, and we've explored a lot of areas surrounding death and the afterlife and whatnot. So, obviously, the science there, the research there is not very, no one can kind of agree on what lies beyond, etc. So, it's just interesting. We've been making a lot of threads this season about connections between love in this, realm in this life and then, what happens beyond, what doesn't happen beyond. So I just find that really fascinating and I like how you differentiated between like, honeymoon phase as I feel like we know it versus like companion, phase. And I, interestingly enough, just saw a video about these beetles. I don't remember what species of beetles that mate for life. And so now I'm stuck thinking, like, do the beetles have a honeymoon phase? Like, are they sexually attracted to each other? Probably, they mate. So I really, really appreciated that. And just to kind of keep pulling at those threads, I know one of your research lines is that romantic love in particular can improve cognition, attention, and memory for anything related to the beloved. Can you talk about what that kind of looks like in real life and real relationships?
So part of this is of course when you see your beloved, you will immediately pay attention to them. When you hear them, you're going to pay attention to them. But it's also that things that are related to your beloved. So if it's a car drives by that's the same make and color and model as your beloved's car, you're now going to see it, notice it more than if it was just another car. Or things that your beloved, maybe your beloved is a fan of Brad Pitt, and now you see a movie poster with a movie with Brad Pitt. And so you're more likely to see that movie poster, to remember having seen it, just because it is related to your beloved and therefore it becomes an emotional stimulus. And so that's what that might look like in everyday life. Your beloved itself, and then anything that reminds you of them, you are more likely to attend to and to remember.
That's a good point, and it makes me think, so, like, on the flip side, romantic love can also impair cognition. So, what do we know about when love helps us function versus, like, hijacks our focus?
Yeah. So I've done a couple of studies on this, and the key point is whether your task is about your beloved or not. So if you're supposed to, if you're talking with your beloved, then it's great that you're attending to them and not attending to other people, for example. But if you were supposed to do something else, maybe your work or your homework or hang out with other people, then your beloved becomes a distractor. And so in a series of studies, I've shown that people think about their beloved on average like 65% of the time they are awake, which is a lot. And some people really like that, really enjoy it. Some people don't enjoy it at all. It becomes sort of obsessive thinking that disturbs them. But in all people, it distracts them from other tasks. And it distracts them from tasks that are not about their beloved. And people may not care. If they enjoy thinking about their beloved, they may not care that their work suffers, but their boss may think otherwise, of course.
Was that, just out of curiosity, was that 65% people that were in the companionship stage of their relationship? Was it at the kind of honeymoon phase that we talked about, or was it just generally people who are in love?
Yeah, so I've observed it across I think 3 different studies now with different samples. So one sample was the sort of people that had been in love only for a short time, but one sample was people that were in love regardless of how long. So there were people that had recently fallen in love and people that had been married for decades. The people that were, or the sample that was in a relationship typically with their beloved, enjoyed thinking about their beloved. And then I had another sample, which was people that experienced limerence and that suffered from limerence actually because they didn't want to experience it. They really didn't like thinking about their beloved so much. So I think it's across the board.
No, it makes a lot of sense. It's like if you have an, unrequited love or whatever, obviously you wouldn't like to be so obsessive, but, when it's healthy or when it's mutually, the same level, I guess, of infatuation, it can be, almost feel like a high. So I want to kind of dig deeper into like, the studies that you've conducted. And I know you mentioned it a little while ago, but you study love using brain measures. I know EEG, ERPs, but also things like self-reporting and cognitive tasks. Can you kind of walk us through a little bit of what an experiment looks like, what the participants are actually doing, and then also what you're looking for, which I know you kind of answered in the last question, but I think it'd be helpful for our listeners who are maybe not so much STEM or, scientifically leaning.
So generally, a study will involve us recruiting people that are in love, and then we ask them to submit pictures of their beloved before the testing session, and sometimes also a picture of a friend. And then we sometimes add to that a picture of a stranger. And then they come into the lab and they usually fill out some questionnaires first. So that's the self report aspect of it. And that's because if I want to know how in love someone is, I just have to ask them. And it doesn't have to be verbal. These questionnaires are pen and paper questionnaires. It also might not ask them directly, how in love are you? But we are using questionnaires such as the infatuation and attachment scales that ask questions like, I think about this person all the time, or I get shaky knees when I'm around them. So we don't actually use the term love, but we are sort of asking them about all sorts of symptoms. And that then gives us an idea of this participant is more in love than another participant, for example. Then when you're done with the questionnaires, we put a head cap on their head, which looks like something you wear to the pool, but it has holes in it. And then we put a little gel in the hole because that will allow the electrode to connect to the scalp because we're measuring electrical brain activation. And then we plug electrodes in each hole, and then we can measure the electrical activation caused by the brain. This is non-invasive in the sense that it doesn't hurt. It's not harmful. People can do this over and over again for hours on end if they wanted to. It's not harmful at all. And then while we are measuring their brain activation, we have them look at these pictures of their beloved, of a friend, and of a stranger to see how their brain responds to those different pictures. An advantage of this method, so we're looking at event-related potentials, which is the electrical activation elicited by an event, which in this case is those different pictures. An advantage of that method is that it has a millisecond precision. So we can see with a millisecond precision when something is happening in the brain. We cannot see where in the brain that's happening. If you want that, you need to use, for example, something like fMRI. Then you don't know when something is happening. So it's like you can get either where, but not when, or when, but not where. You can't get it both. But the beauty also is that these different components of the event-related potential, so the different brain waves, signify different cognitive processes. So we can look at different types of attention, we can look at memory, we can look at how people process feedback or mistakes that they make. So it really tells us what is happening in the brain and at what point in time. And then we can see, usually the brain responds more strongly to the picture of their beloved than a friend and then a stranger. And for example, one of those brain waves is attention. And so that's one way in which we've shown that people have more attention for their beloved than other people. And then we usually take the cap off and then they do a rating task. So we usually have them rate how pleasant and how aroused they feel when they look at each of those pictures. And so that's another way. It's another form of self-report that gives us an idea of how people feel when they look at their beloved, when they look at their friend and a stranger. And that's usually it.
That makes a lot of sense, and I was gonna ask because kind of like what you just said, I'm wondering, like, how different or how similar it is when they're, like, speaking honestly about how they feel about the photo versus, like, what their brains tell you. And so when you're doing this kind of work, it challenges the idea that, like, love is uncontrollable. So what does love regulation mean in practice, and what strategies have the strongest evidence behind them?
Yeah. So one of my research lines has to do with this love regulation. We know that we can regulate our emotions very well. You can make yourself more or less scared, more or less sad, more or less angry, more or less happy. So there's a big literature on emotion regulation. And that's when I started thinking, well, can we also change how in love we are? Can we make ourselves more in love if we want to, or less in love when we want to? And then I first started studying what do people think. So I started testing people's beliefs, and it showed that some people think they should not regulate love feelings. These people said you shouldn't try to increase love feelings for a long-term partner because if you're just falling out of love with someone, you should just break up with them. That's just not meant to be, which I can see why people feel that way. But we know that regulating your emotions is actually very adaptive, very healthy if you do it in the right way. So I think love regulation definitely has its uses. For example, increasing love feelings for a long-term partner or decreasing love feelings for an ex-partner or maybe a forbidden love. And I also found that a good portion of people think they cannot control love feelings. So maybe they didn't think they shouldn't, but they said, I can't do this. They said other people can do it better than I can, which was a little bit sad. But like I said, we know we can regulate our emotions just fine. And so then I try to use some of those emotion regulation strategies to see if we can apply them to love. And my work has shown that looking at pictures of your beloved increases love feelings for them. Thinking positively about the beloved or the relationship or the future increases love feelings. So you can think about, they're so beautiful or smart or helpful or funny, whatever. Or you can think about, our relationship is good. We agree on how to spend money, for example. Or you can think about positive future scenarios. So we'll get married and live happily ever after and get 5 children or 3 dogs, like whatever it is that you want in the future. And so that works. That increases people's love feelings. And we've also shown that fantasizing about having sex with a long-term partner increases sexual desire for that long-term partner, which can be helpful because sexual desire decreases over time. There may be a mismatch between two people in a relationship. And so that is also a strategy that will be easy to use. On the flip side, I have also shown that thinking negatively about the beloved or about the relationship or about the future decreases love feelings, which of course can be helpful in heartbreak if you're heartbroken, or again, if you're in love with someone you shouldn't be in love with. So that also works.
I'm curious as you were talking, like, I think a lot of it is like thinking or positively fantasizing. I'm wondering, is there any like physical things that you can do to, I guess, like regulate love or have love regulation?
So I have a suggestion. So I don't know if this is a study, it's a famous study done in the 70s. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's about a high wobbly bridge and a low sturdy bridge. And they had a female researcher on the middle of the bridge, on both of those. And then the men that passed by, she asked the men, do you want to participate in the study? Here are some pictures, write a story to go with the pictures. And if you want to know more about the study, then here's my phone number. You can call me next week. I will tell you about the results. The men that met this woman on the high wobbly suspension bridge wrote more sexually tinted stories than the men that met her on the sturdy low bridge. And they were also more likely to call her the week after to ask about the study. The interpretation of that study is called misattribution of arousal, which means that if you are on a suspension bridge, that's scary. So now you have, your heart is pounding, you're probably sweating, you're a little nervous, and now you see this woman. And the idea is that you are then misattributing the arousal that you're feeling to the woman instead of the bridge. And so you may be more attracted to the woman because you're like, oh, my heart is pounding. This woman must be very attractive, right? Whereas on the low sturdy bridge, you don't have that physical arousal going on, and so there's no misattribution there. So that is something that people could use in relationships because you can go work out together. That will get your physiological arousal going, and then you can misattribute it to your partner. Or you can watch scary movies or go in a roller coaster, or even just go on like dates to new things, new restaurants, new museums, new cities to sort of keep that spark going.
That's so fascinating. On a side note, I'm seriously so interested in what you're researching. Like, my mind is just being blown every time you speak. Really, really fascinating stuff. And I know you told us, obviously you have many incredibly fascinating research areas. And I know you're kind of exploring some new avenues that have to do with love. And we talked about one of them previously, which was love and addiction. And, we've heard people talk about, when they go through heartbreak or even forbidden love, they use words like, I'm craving that person, or, they almost describe it like a detox. I'm withdrawing from their presence, their scent, their whatever. Can you talk to us a little bit about, the parallels between love and addiction?
Yeah. Yeah, so several reviews have been written in the literature about the striking similarities between love and addiction that you were just talking about, but direct studies directly comparing the two don't exist yet. And so that's why a few years ago it was like, this is a very interesting hypothesis, but we need to actually directly test how these two things are different or the same. So I'm currently wrapping up a study. We're currently writing up the manuscript, so this is preliminary findings. But we did a study in which we recruited people that were both in love and addicted to vaping. We picked vaping not because we thought it's special, but because it seemed practical, because it's legal and it's common. And then we showed them pictures of their beloved and pictures of vaping strangers, because we know if someone who's addicted to vaping sees someone else vape, that will increase their craving, and now they are also more likely to want to vape at the time. And then we looked at, again, self-report. So how much did they crave the vape? How much did they crave their beloved? And we looked at the brain activation and attention to those different pictures. And again, this is preliminary data, but to my surprise, on everything we've measured, people scored higher for their beloved than for their vape. Which was not necessarily what I expected, because these were people that were in love and we didn't specify how long. So again, we have had the whole range of people that had recently fallen in love, that were probably still in that infatuation, passionate love stage, but also people that had been married for years and are probably more in the companionate love or attachment phase. And so it's only one study, but the conclusion of this one study seems to be that love is even more intense than an addiction. So, it's only one study. We need to do more studies. It would be interesting to test it with other substances. So what about, cocaine or heroin? What about measuring other types of brain activation or other types of self-report than what we've done? But yeah, so that's where we're currently at.
That's super interesting. I'm really excited to see where the research goes on that and as you conduct more studies. But I'm with you. I am surprised that love was stronger than, at least in this one, the feelings for their beloved and whatnot were stronger than vaping, which obviously is a very, very common addiction these days. So really interesting. If you don't mind, I would love to kind of explore the other avenues of research that you talked to us about. And I know one of those is parasocial romantic love, which, is not necessarily forbidden love or heartbreak. It's its own, I feel like, category of, unrequited love, which is obviously feelings for celebrities, fictional characters. Can you tell us, what you've kind of discovered about that, what's happening cognitively or emotionally when it comes to parasocial romantic love, kind of when it's healthy versus when it's disruptive?
Yeah, so we're currently doing our first study on parasocial love because my graduate student was interested in the topic. And what we're doing is we're comparing parasocial love with real life love, which is what we ended up calling the sort of more typical love feelings. And so we're doing a very similar study where we get people into the lab that experience a parasocial love. So they experience romantic feelings for, yes, media figures, singers, actors, pop stars, but also maybe fictional characters. So characters from cartoons or movies. And then we show them pictures of that character, that person that they experience love feelings for, a friend and a stranger. And then if they also have a real life beloved at the same time, and some of them do, we also show them the picture of the real life beloved to compare. Again, we're just starting to analyze the data, so it's preliminary findings. But what we're seeing is that people, as especially, experience a lot of passionate love for those media figures or fictional characters, whereas it's more companionate love for their real life beloved, which makes sense because usually companion love takes a while to develop and usually develops as you are in a relationship and hang out with this person, spend a lot of time together, which of course doesn't happen with the media figure or the fictional character. And then the different types of attention. So one form of attention was stronger for the media figure or fictional character, whereas the other type of attention was stronger for the real life beloved. So we're trying to figure out what's going on and how these two forms of love are the same or different. I think it can be okay to have those feelings. They are probably distracting. I don't think we measured that yet. We may in the future, but I assume people think about this media figure or fictional character also for a long time, which they may or may not enjoy. I don't know, but it will distract them from other stuff. And so I think it can be okay. It can probably cause positive emotions. Maybe it can activate people. But I think it becomes a problem if it becomes all consuming, if it becomes like this obsessive thinking that people are not enjoying and it really distracts them from other stuff that they maybe want to be doing, but they feel like they can't focus on. That's, I think, when it would become problematic.
That's really interesting, and as you were talking, I was just thinking because sometimes I'll be, like, on Twitter or Instagram, and I'm like I'll literally laugh, I'll be like, "This is so parasocial," like, just the comments I see, what I'm looking at, the edits of the people, and I'm wondering, like I wonder if part of it is the commonality of, like, loving someone so much that you become parasocial, or, like, I would love to hear your perspective on, like, is the reason why we're so drawn to love and things of that nature is because it's so, like, universal throughout all people?
Yeah, I'm also wondering if it's sort of a safe way of loving, right? If you're not actually really interacting all that much, probably they want to, but they are not, and that is kind of maybe convenient. I don't know. I would have to study that, but yeah. And I think especially, in adolescence, I think it's sort of a safe way to explore loving someone without the interaction piece of it, which is maybe difficult.
That makes sense. I'm just thinking about, like, Tiger Beat or all the posters I had on my wall of, like, Justin Bieber. Just honestly, looking back, it's almost scary. Like, I will say, infatuated. I have a question. So, you also study romantic feelings towards AI companions. What do you think people are actually attaching to, whether it's, like, validation, responsiveness, and how is this changing our expectations of human relationships?
Yeah. So this is obviously a very new development with the surge of these tech generating artificial intelligence applications. People have started interacting with them and are starting to fall in love with them, which is kind of a form of parasocial love, but it's also different in the sense that they are interacting with this AI companion. And so there's a lot of back and forth. People have conversations, and through those conversations, they fall in love with them. And there is some research that shows that it can provide social support, but also that it's associated with greater depressive symptoms. So again, it can be okay, but if it becomes too much, it's probably not okay. A problem, I think, is that in one of the previous studies, about a fifth of the people, so 1 in 5, said they prefer to have a romantic relationship with an AI companion over a real person. that I think can become problematic because it's a little bit scary to think of in the future. Are we all just going to have friendships and romantic relationship with our computer and we're never going to restaurants and bars anymore, but we're all just sitting in our own room interacting with computers instead? That sounds a little dystopian to me. I'm also a little worried again about adolescence because while, having a parasocial love is sort of a nice practice and maybe a stepping stone towards real life love, if you are only experiencing romantic love and relationships with AI, how are you ever going to get the skills to interact in that way with a real person, to actually have a romantic relationship or even ask someone out on a date and have a successful date with someone with a real human. And so I worry about the generation that may start doing that but may never sort of graduate from those kind of romantic relationships to real life. Yeah, and so I'm planning on doing some studies again to compare love feelings for and how the brain responds to your AI companion and versus a real life beloved, just to see how those things are the same and how they're different.
I'm super excited again to see how that unfolds. Lexi put Blade Runner in the chat, which is so true. Like, I feel like we're getting closer and closer to that. And I wonder, like, how that will change because right now we kind of have like large language models that are maybe like not as personalized. But I know there have been some advances where, like, especially celebrities, I've been seeing it like put their I wanna say their personality, but, like, their characteristics into an AI chat bottle, so, like, it embodies that, so I'm wondering, like, if one day we're gonna have, a chatbot that can replicate, yeah, like, your first love or your lost partner that passed away, or you can, like, customize it more, and I wouldn't be surprised if we're heading that way, and I like what you said about the parasocial aspect because I had never thought of AI relationships or, being in love with an AI, whatever it may be, chatbot in that way where it's like with a celebrity or fictional character, it's like you will never have that intimacy. So you don't have to practice those social skills or be intimate. But with the chatbot, it's different where it's like, again, it's not social skills, but you are having this kind of fake intimacy or like the responsiveness of having someone always available to talk. So it's like you're intimate with them, and they can never leave you, but then it's like you can never see them. I don't know, I'm really curious and excited to follow your research and your findings because obviously this is something that I've been seeing everywhere, so super excited about that. And I know we've talked about some really, really incredible things in this interview. It's been a blast for Lexi and I, and we're so, so excited to share it with our listeners. So I guess if there's one thing that you want our audience to walk away from this interview with, or maybe a piece of advice or just anything you want them to know, we would love for you to share.
Yeah. So I'm always trying to advocate for doing research on romantic love. It's not super common. It's sometimes difficult to get money to do research because it's not seen as a serious research project. But I think, romantic love applies to almost everyone. Not everyone, but almost everyone falls in love at least once, and many people fall in love many more times in their life. And it really affects us, and both good and bad, right? It causes a lot of positive emotions, well being. Romantic relationships are good for people, but also causes a lot of jealousy, anxiety. Dysfunctional relationships are not good for people. And so there's a lot of positive and negative effects. And so I think we really need to study this to really better understand and help people have more positive and fewer negative effects of love and relationships. And the other thing is that, in contrast to what people may think, it is possible to regulate your love feelings. And so you may want to try those strategies out, and no one needs to know about that. You don't have to go to a doctor or a therapist. Your partner doesn't have to know what you're doing. And this is stuff you could just do by yourself that may be helpful.
I love that. I think that that is really good advice, and I agree. I think that doing the research and having people look into this is really important. So I do have one last question for you. So, do you have anything you'd like to promote, anywhere you'd like us to find you, whether that's a social media or a book or anything?
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff that we talked about, especially in the beginning about the chemicals and the brain regions and whether it's an emotion or not, and whether you can regulate it or not, I wrote about in an article called "Refuting Six Misconceptions About Romantic Love," and people can Google that. It's freely available if they want to read more about that. And then my lab is also on Facebook. It's called NEM Lab, NEM Lab. if they want to stay up to date on the latest findings of the lab.
Awesome. We'll be sure to include that in our show notes so that if anyone wants to check it out directly. But thank you so, so much. Like I said, this was a really, really incredible interview. And I think it's going to start this season off and lay the groundwork for many of us who are not familiar with the science behind love and the science of the chemicals behind love and all that amazing stuff. So super, super excited. Lexi, is there anything else you want to add?
I just wanted to say thank you so much. I've learned a lot, and what I find interesting is that we know some, there's a lot we don't know. And I think that doing more research and looking into this is really important because I find that love is such a powerful entity. And so I'm excited to know that there's people like you that are out there studying this and trying to figure out why we are the way that we are. So just thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, thanks so much for having me. It's always so much fun to talk about my research, so thank you.